Okay, welcome everybody to the Local Government Pension Scheme Pension Board. Today's Wednesday, the 21st of July, and we're starting at 2 o'clock. I've just got a few announcements to make before we get started. The council will be holding this meeting electronically. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the council's website for them to do so. Members of the board are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak and switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched off if and when speaking in the meeting. On. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raised hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate of each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function and indicating for, against or abstain. And I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours, and these will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. So firstly, I'd like to announce a member change. So Derek Ashley has stepped down from the board in May, and I was appointed as employer representative for Hertfordshire County Council. I'm acting as chair today, but I will in time become a normal member of the board. There are no apologies today, and so I'm going to ask members to introduce themselves. I'll go first. My name is Councillor Adam Mitchell. I was previously the Vice Chairman of the Pensions Committee, and now, as I say, a member of the board. I'd like to ask the employer representatives to introduce themselves first, and the first is Sarah Ansell.
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Ansell. I'm an employer representative from the University of Hertfordshire.
There are employer representative standing substitutes, and the first of those is James Kidd.
Hi there, I'm James Kidd. I'm an employer representative from Hertfordshire Constabulary.
Thank you. And Rob McCarthy. Do we have Rob McCarthy to introduce himself?
In the meeting, I can see him, but he might.
I think he may be having a technical issue. So I think we'll move on to the member representatives, and perhaps Rob can introduce himself when he speaks later. So the first of those is Gail Johnson.
Good afternoon, I'm Gail Johnson. I'm a retired accountant and I'm a member representative.
Thank you, Gail. The next is Kevin O'Daly.
Hi, it's Kevin O'Daly, member seat, and I'm originally also sat on the unit and observer seat on the pension committee.
Thank you, Kevin. And Monica Patel.
Hi, I'm Monica Patel. I'm in the legal department. I'm an member representative. I'm an active employee.
Thank you very much. And the member representative standing substitutes are David Gooden.
They haven't joined the meeting yet, Chairman.
Oh, that's okay. Is that the same with Tim Perkins?
That's correct.
I'm here.
Oh, I'm a second, sorry.
Hello, Tim. Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Tim Perkins, standard sub-member representative, currently Chief Officer and Clerk to Abbots Langley Parish Council for 38 days, 2 hours and a few minutes when I will become a retired member representative. I'm not looking forward to it. Stop smiling, Mike.
Okay, thank you very much. And is David on the call yet? No? Okay, we'll move on. So the next
point.
Chairman,
before you do, can I just say I'm here as well. I'm not quite sure why my name's not on there.
Sorry, Mike. I did write your name down. I did write your name down. Sorry about that. Would you? I've just got it on a separate piece of paper. Apologise. No. Mike Collier, would you introduce yourself, please?
I'm a retired member of the board and currently vice chairman.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate that. So, okay, the next point is members' interests, and members are asked to declare any pecuniary or declarable interest at this stage. Is your hand up for a reason, Mike? No. Okay. If anything does come to mind as we go through the items and you feel that you have any interest to declare, you can declare it at the beginning of that particular item as well. So you'll have another chance there. Okay. So I think we'll move to the minutes of the last meeting. I wasn't at the last meeting, so I can only note those minutes. But can we have in the chat, please, if people are happy to confirm the minutes? Thank you. I think those minutes are confirmed. Thank you very much. Thank you. So the first sort of proper item is the Good Governance Project, and I think that's going to be introduced to us by Catherine McFadden. Catherine, would you like to introduce the item to us? Thank you.
I can do. I don't know if Patrick wanted to say a few words first, or will I just go straight?
I can do, Catherine. This report that Catherine actually, for background, and she'll elaborate, she sits on the Scheme Advisory Board, one of the working parties which is involved in this Good Governance report. The Scheme Advisory Board is a body that is made up of employer and member reps and commissions pieces of work with regard to the local government pension scheme, and can make recommendations to the Secretary of State for MHCLG with regards to the putting those recommendations into law as regulations. And they have commissioned a series of reports since their inception on codes of transparency, cost management, responsible investment, and this one that we are sharing with you today, the Good Governance report. Catherine, I'll let Catherine talk to the report, and then I'll pick up afterwards with Catherine on questions. And I'd like to say just a few points about training. So I'll pick up after Catherine's done her report.
Thanks, Patrick. So you should have the 3-page report, I think, in your pack. I wasn't going to share any additional slides or anything. I just planned to talk through the report and maybe give some background as to how and some of the reasons some of the recommendations have come about. As Patrick said, Hyman Robertson actually led the project for the Scheme Advisory Board into Good Governance. A little bit of background on it I've included there. This probably started back in 2013 when the Public Service Pensions Act gave the pensions regulator powers of oversight for governance in the LGPS, actually across all public service pension schemes, but including the LGPS. And that was the first time the pensions regulator had that kind of role with respect to the LGPS. And so I think it's safe to say they've been on a bit of a learning curve with it. Public service pensions were new to them. And when they first looked at the LGPS and discussed it with the Scheme Advisory Board, they kind of made some observations that the governance arrangements for our scheme are not the usual, or certainly not what they would see as typical in, for example, a private sector pension scheme. Private sector pension schemes are trust-based arrangements. You have trustees, you have real separation, certainly post-Maxwell, you have complete separation between the pension fund and the sponsoring employer, and that's very clearly ring-fenced. And I think the pensions regulator first looked at the LGPS and thought this does look a bit strange, in particular the way that typically the main employer in the fund, in our case Hertfordshire County Council, is charged with administering the fund, has this role as a kind of joint role as being an employer and also kind of in charge of administering it. So to the pensions regulator and to other observers, actually, sometimes our governance arrangements do look a bit unusual and a bit strange. So working alongside the TPR, the Scheme Advisory Board, first of all, commissioned a report from KPMG, which really discussed separating the local government pension scheme out from local government and maybe looking at establishing it in a way that was more like the private sector. I think that report didn't really land very well. It probably didn't fully comprehend just how tightly embedded in the public sector the local government pension scheme is, and how it's such a fundamental part of local government, and it is very much public money, and it kind of missed, I think, a bit of the point around the fact that that ultimately it's funded and guaranteed by the taxpayer, and therefore it's really important that there is a local democratic oversight of the pension scheme. So that report kind of got shelved a little bit, I think. And then in 2019, the Scheme Advisory Board, again with the pensions regulator looking over their shoulder, looked at it again and said, look, OK, let's have a review of our governance arrangements, and let's look at them in a more holistic way rather than just looking at this one particular issue. Let's look at the entire picture of our governance, the structure of it, what's good about it, and where there are things that we could do or where there is room for improvement. And Hymans Robertson, the project team that I worked on, helped carry out that work between 2019 and 2021. As your report says, it was carried out in 3 phases. The first phase was a very consultative phase. We surveyed almost everybody we could think of, I think. We surveyed finance officers, the Section 151 officers at the councils, councillors, and pension board members such as yourselves, pension fund officers, trade union representatives, member representatives, and asked everybody what they thought was working about the governance of the funds and what wasn't. And what really came out of that was that even within our LGPS arrangements, we do have some different structures in the way that it's carried out. There are some examples of it being done slightly differently in different places. And what we recommended out of the back of that was that we probably don't need any structural change to the LGPS governance arrangements. We don't need separation in that sense from the administering authorities, but there are definitely some things that we could do that would, first of all, it would identify the best practice that is being used and maybe share that more widely, and that would alone improve the standards of governance and administration. So I kind of move away from a real focus on the structure to let's focus on how best we can share the best practice. The Phase 2 report had established working groups, and again, a really broad church of people. All the types of stakeholders I mentioned in Group 1 were included, as well as consultants, the pensions regulator, and representatives actually from PLSA, the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Group as well, were involved. And they really reviewed governance arrangements, looked at the various different areas and made a series of recommendations to improve standards. So they looked at, well, what is good practice, best practice, what does that look like, and made a series of recommendations. The Scheme Advisory Board accepted those recommendations, looked at them and said, yeah, OK, we agree this is the way forward. And then over Phase 3, really did a bit more work to flesh those out and see how exactly would they be implemented. MHCLG were very much part of that Phase 3 piece of work, and Phase 2 actually, and I think that's quite important because there were some things that these groups identified and said, oh, that might be interesting to explore, or maybe we could do something in that, and MHCLG said, no, we don't want to go into that area with this, or that would cut across too many pieces of other legislation, we don't want to go near that. So there is kind of, and the reason I share that is because there's kind of an acceptance by MHCLG of the recommendations that have made it into that final report. So it's kind of been past MHCLG once before it got sent to them. So they were involved in pulling the report together. So if I go on now and talk about some of those key areas and key recommendations that were agreed, probably one of the most significant ones was a recommendation that each pension fund, each administering authority should have a single named officer who's responsible for the delivery of all LGPS related activity. And that sounds kind of obvious and maybe a bit innocuous, but there are lots of different organisation structures throughout the country across the different LGPS funds as to how this is delivered. And what we saw was a really strong correlation between really good governance outcomes with where there was a really clear head of fund where that person had, and I think the words I'm going to look at my report here, had sufficient expertise. So it was somebody who is a pensions professional, and that is a major part of their role. So not typically the Section 151 officer, but it can be if that person has the relevant expertise, but somebody with the relevant expertise. Capacity, so pretty much running the LGPS and all the complexity, and I'm sure you get a flavour of the complexity by the variation of the reports that come before this board. You get some sense of the breadth of what's involved in this role. So somebody who has the capacity to focus on it and to give it the right amount of time and leadership that it needs. And importantly, seniority within their organisation to carry out the role. That person has to be able to have a voice with it at the management within the council, really, because some of the issues that we've seen associated with, or some of the areas where there are poor governance or problems where we don't have this role, is where, for example, the pension fund is unable to secure an appropriate level of resource to carry out its duties effectively, and sometimes that can be because there's maybe just not a senior enough voice at the table explaining why that resource is needed and what it can be done from. So those were the things that were associated with good governance, and the job titles that are typically associated with it would be kind of head of pensions or director of pensions, something like that. Talks about each fund. This one here, the new governance compliance statement, that is really, I suppose, the main document for governance that explains, it's asking funds to be public and talk about their governance arrangements in a public way, make it very clear so that all stakeholders have absolutely transparency and all on how the fund is managed and governed, and have a place to go to find the information really contained in the other recommendations. So that one's what that's really about. Conflicts of interest. This was, as you might have gathered from my preamble at the start, this was one of the big areas for the project to look at, because there are conflicts of interest inherent in the structure, conflicts of interest tensions, if you like, by having the main employer have the role that it does in administering the fund. And what the project team decided to do was kind of deal with that up front and ask the administering authority to produce in its governance compliance statement a declaration or a statement, a policy as to how those specific conflicts of interest are handled. And so some of them might include things, for example, and I hasten to using the word conflicts of interest, I'm really using the words that were played back to us by, I suppose, outsiders looking at the LGPS. Very much as part of this project, it was really interesting to have conversations with people who are not involved in the LGPS day to day, but do interact with it a bit, and to get their perceptions of what the conflicts of interest, perceived conflicts of interest, potential conflicts of interest might be. And some of the things that were flagged were the contribution rate setting process for the administering authority, and other employers maybe feeling that there wasn't ultimate transparency. In some cases, the administering authority is paying a lower contribution rate than some other employers in the fund. And while those of us who are part of that might think, well, that's entirely fair, there's a whole host of reasons why that might be the case, the perception of that by other employers in the fund, it definitely leads to the perception that there might be a conflict of interest there. So it was that type of thing that it was asked that people are more transparent about. Some of the other examples that people raised are included there. So, for example, where there's a commercial relationship between the administering authority and another employer in the fund, particularly where that might relate to a transfer of staff between one or the other, to make sure that that's dealt with fairly and it doesn't feel like the administering authority is getting a better deal, I suppose, than the other employer. Some other ones that are particularly topical just now are investment decisions being made, for example, about local investment decisions, about investing in local infrastructure, local projects like social housing, if that is done by the fund, how it's done and how it's managed. And another one that, again, is really topical just now is how the pension fund responds appropriately to council decisions or policies, or any other employer, as well as the main council's decisions and policies on issues such as climate change, carbon footprinting, that kind of thing. How does the pension fund make sure it's making its own decisions and being clear about that? So those were some of the examples of conflict of interest that the fund is being asked to consider and make sure it has a policy for managing and being public about it. The other areas covered were representation. I'm talking to the Pensions Board today, where you do have representation from some employers in the fund and also member representation in the fund. So again, the working group the working group actually just asked for a policy on representation of scheme members and other fund employers within the administrative authority's governance arrangements for the fund. So that was as far as the working group went. The Scheme Advisory Board actually added a bit to the report when it went to committee and said that the Scheme Advisory Board believes that there should be representation. So not just explain what you've got, they went a wee bit further and said they believe that there should be appropriate representation and that needs to be considered. So other bits just to touch on very briefly were administration standards. When the working group looked at some of the areas or some of the committees or some of the funds that maybe had less good governance arrangements, one of the things that came to the fore was that sometimes the committees or the decision-making bodies spent a disproportionate amount of time considering only the investment areas of the fund and didn't devote adequate governance bandwidth to other areas of managing the LGPS, such as the administration, and governance, communication, and policies on employers, and even the liability side, actually, as well as assets, you have liabilities to manage as well. So there was a recommendation that that the administration authorities should be asked to report on the administration standard, and there was a kind of an agreement of a list of KPIs against which to manage standards of service. But really, the broader remit behind that is it's not really about the administration standards as such. It's about making sure that the governance body is aware of the administration standards and it's being reported to them. Finally, the last point in it, and I'll look back and talk about the pensions regulator here again, is the knowledge and understanding. It's titled Knowledge and Understanding. When the TPR looks at the LGPS, and I think sometimes where it sees the arrangements we have where we have councillors, and actually we've just been through an election process and we have a new committee, and they see the turnover that can happen very quickly, and recognising that this is a really technical and quite specialist area, one of the questions they raise is how do we make sure that those charged with the governance of the scheme have appropriate levels of knowledge and understanding to carry that role out effectively. And we did quite a lot of work with the pensions regulator on it because I think they were quite anchored in the private sector model, where there's quite a lot of professionalism of the trustee role, and quite often it's almost people independent from the company entirely. It's professional trustees that are carrying out these roles. And we did work quite hard with them, helping them look at our governance arrangements and comparing it actually with other areas of the council as well, where elected members sit on committees that can be very technical, but it's vital that they're there because they're representing the taxpayers' interests and looking after that. So we did quite a lot of work with them, helping them to understand that. And where we got to, though, was that recognising that elected members have a role, officers have a role, advisors have a role to play, and ensuring that everybody that has a role to play in it has the appropriate level of knowledge and understanding to be able to carry that role out effectively. So I think we were quite happy to get to that wording, but it means that there is an expectation that those of us who have roles in that part of the running of the LGPS do undertake an appropriate level of training to be able to carry that out. And that isn't just targeted at elected members or indeed members of the pensions boards and committees. It extends to officers as well. So those were the main bits. Talk through that in quite an amount of detail. I'll kind of finish up by saying the recommendations are currently with MHCLG. We're waiting for them to come back and respond. The Scheme Advisory Board has approved it all and has written to them effectively saying, these are our recommendations, please could you turn them into guidance or legislation? And it's kind of just in the queue at MHCLG for that to happen. And I think as and when that does, there will be some implications for the fund. I'll maybe hand back over to Patrick to talk about where the fund is relative to some of these. Before
you do, I came into sort of being a councillor with sort of 15 years of pensions admin experience, and I think it was interesting because mostly that was sort of in the private sector as well, and I think because pensions legislation is always evolving all the time. You can never get to the point where you say, okay, I know everything now. And I think part of what Patrick has done with the committee when I was on the committee is that we did this sort of knowledge gap sort of analysis. And I found that really useful. It's sort of knowing what you don't know, and then you can really focus your training. And I think Patrick's going to come on to talk a bit more about the training now. Patrick.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Catherine, as well. Just to give some background as to what's happened locally with respect to the report that Hyman's have provided to the Scheme Advisory Board. Catherine presented to the Chief Financial Officer, Director of Resources, Scott Crudgington, my immediate manager, Stephen Pillsworth, who's the Assistant Director of Finance, and to myself, and explained what was contained within that report with regard to recommendations. And this conversation took place early this year. I think it's February, March, Catherine, around about that time. And we went into a lot of detail about what the implications were with respect to the fund and officers' roles as well. And so we've been reflecting on those recommendations. We are addressing some of them, and we are looking to address the majority of them before they come into guidance regulations regulations by MHCLG. So we're looking first of all at the governance of the fund with respect to the responsible officer, resourcing of the fund, and also training. And that's another point I'd like to touch on. And thank you, Adam, for talking about the sort of training we've supported the council committee, the committee members on. We have been working with Hyman's in the background to develop an online learning academy, which we have provided. We sort of shared this with the committee at their meeting last Wednesday, and we will also be sharing it with the members of the board. It contains a number of modules where you can get some background information and knowledge development on certain topic areas. That's one part of the training that we're going to offer to this board. And also what we'll be doing is some training via MS Teams, such as this meeting that you've got now. We will do some informal training on specific topic areas as well, bringing in either specialists such as Catherine, Barry and Sandy on the investment side, or officers will do the training, or we may bring in external lawyers as well if it's a particular part of regulations that we need to explain. And the legal side of regulations can be quite complex. We will send this out to you over the next week, and we will again do a sort of what Adam talked about, the gap analysis to identify the knowledge of members of the committee and board. And we did do this with the board members about 18 months ago. And what we got, the results we got was that the committee and board were on the same levels with regard to knowledge development. There were certain gaps. We knew where the gaps were. And so the training will be geared to address the gaps, but also to develop knowledge in areas where we have got particular strategy work that's coming up over the next 12 months, where you are going to be required to scrutinise and monitor recommendations, decisions made by the committee with respect to valuation, investment strategy. So we'll be doing some targeted learning, both the committee and yourselves. That's all I was going to say on the training side. And with respect to the rest of the report, we have been in discussions at management level with respect to how we address some of the requirements that are set out in those recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you both, Catherine and Patrick, for those comments. If anyone else would like to make a comment, could you please raise your hand using the function, please? I'm not seeing any raised hands, so the recommendation on this is that the pension board notes and comments on the content of the Hyman's report. So could you please put your sort of, if you note the report into the chat, please. Thank you. That's noted. So thank you again, Catherine, and thank you, Patrick. And I think we can move on to the next item now, which is the pension fund statement of accounts. And I think we have Philip Prasad, senior accountant, to present that. Is that correct?
That's correct, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, all. So the pension fund accounts, statement of accounts are one element of the pension fund annual report and are audited separately to the County Council by our external auditors, Ernst & Young. The draft accounts were completed by sent to external audit on the 15th of June, 6 weeks ahead of the deadline, which is the 31st of July. The audit of the fund started on the 21st of June and is currently still ongoing, with the expected sign-off to be September of this 2021. Due to the impact from COVID-19, the government extended the deadline both for 2021 accounts and 21-22 accounts until September, 30th September, so we will be still within the timetable. The fund is conscious, however, of any impacts to employers with year ends 31st of March and will endeavour to complete in time. The fund has had a positive year with the total value increasing by just over 1 billion, attributable to the market rebound from COVID-19, the strategic allocation of investments and market reactions to global news such as the Brexit deal, COVID-19 vaccinations and the US elections. The overall investment return for the year was 21.0% net of fees, which was in excess of the benchmark of 13.3%. The number of members in the fund slightly decreased by 399 to just under 110,000 at 31st of March 2021. And then, although the fund audit hasn't completed yet, officers are aware of one item that was presented in the audit results report, and I will discuss this shortly. Once the audit is complete, the pension fund annual reports and the extracts that's found within the report and accounts included within HCC's own statement of accounts will be submitted to the audit committee for approval on the 24th of September. If there's any recommendations from EY that require restatement, the accounts will be amended before being brought to the audit committee. The table on 4.3 shows how the increase of 1.029 billion is comprised. Of this, 25.9 million is due to the additions relating to members' contributions and payments. This figure also shows that the fund continues to be cash flow positive. Investment management fees of 18.7 million. And then we had 1.022 billion net returns of investments, of which 974 million of that is attributable to the increase in market value. Item 4.7 shows the management expenses for the year. And in 2021, the fund management fees increased by 2.4 million to 18.7 million, whilst outperforming the benchmark of 7.8% net of fees. The breakdown of this increase is due to the following. We had a 0.4 million decrease in equity management investment fees. This was due to the movement of 300 million of equities from our Allianz portfolio in August 2020. We've had a 0.9 million increase in pool property investment fees. This is due to 3 new investment managers starting in 2021. These are, and sorry for the acronyms, Legal and General High Lease Value, Legal and General Private Rental Sector, and M&G. There was an increase of 1.9 million in unit trust investment manager fees, and this was due to 2 new investment trust investments. These were Insight and Longview, and a large increase in the unit trust valuations themselves. And then we also had a 0.3 million increase in transaction fees. Sorry, I disconnected slightly. We had a 0.3 million increase in transaction costs, and that's due to transfer of assets from Baillie Gifford to UBS, Allianz to Longview, and the UBS to Insight. Item 4.10 summarises the net asset statement and highlights the movements in the main asset classes between March 2020 and March 2021. The large majority of the large positive and negative movements are due to the number of transactions in 2021, which are summarised in 4.11. Lastly, as discussed earlier, we've got one item that will be discussed in the audit results report, and this is regarding the level 3 assets. So for a reminder, level 3 assets are the most illiquid assets and the hardest to value with no open market data. And for our private equity investments, they're actually also valued 1 quarter behind. So our March position, our March results are our December position. For one manager, we didn't receive our December data until late May. So unfortunately, the accounts were based on a September position with a roll forward cash factored in. Since this report was written, more data has been received across all our private equity managers, and overall the fund has undervalued private equity by 48 million, and this is higher than the 41 million pound materiality level, and therefore we're going to have to restate the accounts. We're likely to restate the accounts in August to capture the most up-to-date information, and we'll work with the various parties to get this completed. That's all I was going to say. Happy to answer any questions. I think Mike has one.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, I'd like to bring in Mike now, please.
Thank you. Just comment that noting that one of the managers was late getting the information to us, should we be concerned about their overall competence in their management of our investments, and have they got suitable things in procedures in place to make sure that we get things on time in future?
So although they were later than expected, it's mainly because they have a December 31st year end. So it takes a bit longer for those results to come out due to they have to be audited. I have spoken to that manager since. Normally we expect results to be 90 days from the 31st of December. However, they've also stated that will likely move to 90 to 120 days just due to the complexity of these funds.
Thank you. Can I ask Tim Perkins now, please?
Yeah, very brief question. Thanks, Chairman. 4.6, the members that have transferred out of the fund, 17.2 million. I was just tapping away on my calculator here and can't actually work the percentage out because it's obviously very small of the 5.8 billion. Do we know how many members that was? I'm just trying to get a sense for if there's a lot of members transferring out small pots or a few members transferring out big pots is kind of the sense that number does give me, although I appreciate in percentage terms there's quite a lot of zeros before you get to anything of any significance.
Sorry, I think I have to turn my camera off because I'm lagging quite a bit at the moment, so I missed part of that question. Apologies, Tim.
All right, just to summarise, on 4.6, 17.2 million was transferred out of the scheme. I was just trying to get a sense whether that was lots of little pots or any big pots, or although it is a very small number compared with the 5.8 billion, I'll give you that. But given the amount of press there is about people transferring out of final salary schemes, I was just trying to get a little bit more of a feeling for whether that is an ongoing issue. I know it's been raised before here, and there's been the number has been steadily increasing. I think it's probably fair to say, but it's obviously in percentage terms fairly small.
Yes, so the transfers out, unfortunately, I don't have the breakdown of what size these pots are. I can get that for the next pension board. Compared to previous years, I think it is slightly increasing, as you have stated. We haven't had any bulk transfers in or out this year. That's where I'd be a bit more. We would be a bit more worried. But we can't control members, of course, leaving the fund. Each year will vary slightly, depending on situations.
Okay, thanks very much. But it'd just be useful to know the number of members. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I ask Gail Johnson to come forward, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the valuation methods, and I take the point about level 3 and the difficulty of obtaining a valuation there. It's actually level 2 that I wanted just to be reassured on. We're told that level 2 are financial instruments where quoted market prices are not available. But actually, it seems to me that that's actually the bulk of the investments. And I take it's because they're in unitized vehicles. But do they themselves not have quoted market prices. I wasn't quite sure why they would not be available.
So our level 2 is mostly made up of our fund manager from UBS. Although level 2 are items that are not traded frequently. However, they are available on the open market, so we can get readily available data for those. So although it may be months between movements, we can get data from that. So the level 2 items are a lot easier to value compared to level 3.
So that is up to date and openly available information then.
It is, yes, that's correct.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Patrick.
Yeah, I just want to come back on some of the comments or questions. So on the Gail, with respect to the level 2, yes, the UBS holdings are unitised funds and they are readily available market prices. Those units are priced, I believe, daily. On the level 3, due to the nature of the assets, such as private equity and property, they're very difficult to value. There's no readily available market prices, so they normally require third-party independent valuations, and this is why there is a lag in production of the audited accounts. So what Phil and the team will do is use the recent version of those audited accounts and look at cash. So for example, say 31st of December, and then look at cash flows that we've paid out, such as commitments to those private equity funds and distributions from those. So cash flows in and out, and then make a decision around the value as at the 31st of March using the information, the best information they've got to hand. Those formal statements that have been audited will then probably come in a month or two afterwards. However, that's after we've produced the accounts, and so that's why we then have to restate them if we go through a materiality threshold which has been agreed with the auditors. So we are investing a lot more sort of liquid assets, and there is going to be this ongoing issue with the auditing and the production of those financial statements for those structures. With respect to the question Tim asked about the transfers out, yes, Phil is correct. We haven't done any significant bulk transfers, and a bulk transfer is where you've got a group of employees who are moving from, say, one academy into another academy trust in another authority, and so the assets will be and liabilities will transfer over to another fund. Individuals that are requesting to basically cash in their benefits and move out into another pension scheme, what we are requiring them to do now is provide us with a letter confirming that they've taken independent financial advice. And this is to mitigate against the rogue scams that are out there, where people have been encouraged to look at cashing in your fund, going and buying sort of certain assets, and then subsequently finding out that they've lost a significant value of their pension pot, and then they've gone back to the fund that agreed to the transfer, and normally with lawyers in to bring legal proceedings against the fund that they were incorrectly advised. And so our requirements are now that we seek letters all signed off by independent financial advisors that are regulated by the FCA, confirming that they've given this advice to this individual.
Thank you, Philip and Patrick. I'm not seeing any more questions wanting to be asked. So if I just summarise the recommendation, it's the Pension Board is asked to note and comment on the unaudited statement of accounts for 2020-21, and if people could just please put that they've noted that into the chat, please. Thank you. I think that's noted. So we'll move now to the next item, which is item 4, the Pension Fund Risk Register report. And I think we've got Anne to introduce that report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on. Thank you, Chair. This is the Pension Fund Risk Register report for the quarter January to March 2021. The Pension Fund Risk Register report is new to the Pensions Board, with its first time being presented being the December 2020 meeting. The purpose of this risk register report is to provide the board with further clarity on the risks exposed to the pension fund. The management of pension fund risks has maintained consistent with last quarter, with 2 risks moving from green to amber and 1 risk having an elevated amber risk score. This has been reflected in the risk dashboard in Appendix A. Risk 3, relating to the suitability of the investment strategy statement, has increased from a green to an amber risk as a result of the fund's asset allocation being overweight in overseas equity and underweight in bonds. Risk 7, relating to the data being maintained by our pension administrators, the LPPA, has also increased from a green to an amber risk, as we've been informed that they are changing administration systems from Altair to Civica. This risk exposes the fund. It exposes the fund to additional risk because of risks associated with the completeness, accuracy, and service delivery. Risk 9, relating to McLeod in the LGPS scheme and Sargent in the fire scheme, has increased in score as an amber risk due to the additional complexity in managing the fire scheme. In regards to McLeod, there's a heightened burden on our administrators as they would need to perform an underpin check on all members to determine whether they are better off retiring with the care or final salary scheme until the underpins removal in 2022. In respect of the fire scheme, we note that the regulations are not in place until 2023. Therefore, decisions will need to be made on the pension treatment of all members who retire between now and then. We have detailed our current risk control mechanisms in Appendix B, which outlines how the fund currently manages each risk. We will continue working together with the LPP to ensure that risks are managed effectively and seek improvements where possible. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. So as I read the report, there are no red risks, I see, but actually the data maintenance risk is our highest scored risk. Yes. And I believe that's because we're moving data from one system to another, but also there might be some sort of processing of that data, sort of cleanup exercise. Maybe you could give us a little bit more detail about that, our biggest risk, please.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, we are actually working together with our actuary on this exercise, as our actuary would like the LPPA to perform a data cleansing exercise to ensure all the data that is being transferred to the new system is complete, accurate, and there are no duplication of data, and to ensure that it's as good as possible.
Thank you. And can I ask Mike to ask his question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was just reading through the reports, which I welcome. I think it's, as you say, it's a further improvement. I think which is a theme I'm finding throughout these papers, which I'm pleased to acknowledge. Some of the risks fall upon seeding employers or the sponsoring employer, and some where there is no remaining seeding employer, it will fall upon the fund more generally. Has any work been done to separate those two out? And if not, what would be involved in doing that?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, as part of our internal risk control process, we do analyse risk depending on how it affects the employer or how it affects the fund in particular. Something I can do next board meetings, I can bring that work to demonstrate how each risk differentiates between the two.
Thank you. I think that would be useful.
Thank you. I think that'd be very useful. Yeah, thank you.
And I think Gail has a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to say thank you for the reports. I know I complained the last time that I wasn't being able to follow some of them, and I do find them improved this time, so thank you. I wanted to look at actually look at an item a little bit further on. It's on Agenda Pack, page 94. It's the risks to the success of the risk management policy. And I just was thinking back to what we were talking about in the earlier session on governance, that we identify there's a key person risk leading to a lack of ongoing knowledge or understanding and inappropriate levels of risk being taken without proper controls. I imagine that that's something that the council itself has got as a risk, and a risk that they can mitigate. Is that the case?
Thank you, Gail. At current, we haven't demonstrated that as a risk on our register. However, this is something that Patrick has been looking into further as a part of our governance arrangements. I'll just hand it over to Patrick to discuss further. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I think, Gail, I'll deal with your question. Yes, we are looking at succession planning, particularly with respect to the fund across the corporate entity of the council. They will have succession planning in place, particularly where you've got senior officers who've got certain responsibilities, such as myself with the fund. I'm increasing my team. I have a new finance manager who is solely going to deal with the pension side on investments, and I'm also looking to recruit a specialist governance manager as well, who will exclusively focus on the employers and the member engagement, and also communications with members, employers and interested stakeholders, and also the rollout of the training program to support committee and board members. So the emphasis on how we're supporting the fund has changed, and we have been looking at this for some time, even in advance of what the Scheme Advisory Board has put out in their recommendations. And so succession planning is key, particularly where you have officers who are getting nearer to retirement, so to speak. You need to make sure that you've got individuals who are coming through your structure that have got the appropriate skills. And one of the knowledge requirements under the Scheme Advisory Board's recommendations is that officers are continuously developing their knowledge. And so as part of their performance appraisals and objectives, we put in place performance development plans to address areas where they may be needing to upskill, particularly if they're being given additional responsibilities.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That's very clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I think knowledge and data transfer have both been highlighted in our discussion. So I don't think there's any more sort of questions to be asked. So I'll just let you know what the recommendation is that the pension board notes and comments on the content of the attached report. So please could you put that you've noted in the chat. Thank you.
Sorry, Adam, while members are recording their votes or noting the report, John Crowhurst, who will be presenting the LPPA administration report, will be talking about Project PACE, which is the system change that the LPPA are introducing, and the transition of the data. So some of the questions that you may or members may have, it might be more appropriate that those questions are asked during that particular report, because John and his colleagues are the ones who are facilitating the transition. I know Catherine might want to comment during that report as well, because we've asked our actuary to provide oversight as well.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So that has been noted, and we're going to now move on to item 5, which is the employer risk and performance report. And again, we have Anne to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the employer risk and performance report for the quarter January to March 2021. This report provides the board with further detail into the employer risk function of the fund and overall fund performance, which includes audit reviews, treasury management, and our pension administrators' performance. In section 4, we have analysed scheme employers by risk categories. Red risk rated employers decreased by 8 in the quarter, which is heavily driven by the number of admission agreements we signed in the quarter. The breakdown of their ongoing deficit position is detailed in Table 3, and the number of employers being monitored under each risk category is outlined in Appendix A. The admission agreement policy was developed to reduce the backlog number of admission agreements. This policy has been extremely successful since implementation in July 2019, as the average number of admission agreements has reduced to more than half. We had deferred 2 employers last quarter due to non-compliance, and one of those employers have subsequently submitted their admission agreement. However, the other has not yet taken action. We will continue to engage with their trustees and the academy in order to escalate further. Front officers have also been engaging with employers with outstanding exit payments, with the majority of these employers being community admission bodies, such as citizen advice bureaus and housing associations. We have successfully sealed a repayment plan with the employer with the largest deficit of £2 million. Front officers will continue to engage with the remaining employers to agree a legal repayment plan. In Part 3, we have highlighted specific employer matters and note that we have concluded 10 admission agreements this quarter, which further demonstrates the success of the admission agreement delays policy. The funding strategy statement is out for consultation following amendments to Regulation 64 in respect of exit credits and employer flexibilities. This will be reviewed by committee at its September meeting and will also come to board following that meeting. The performance monitor in Appendix D highlights the progress of the 2021 audits. Details of late payers and forms are outlined in Appendix F. Details of complaints and IDRPs are outlined in Appendix E, and we note the number of these have increased this quarter. Lastly, the LPPA's performance against their SLAs remains elevated above their target of 95%. However, member satisfaction fell slightly in Q4 as a result of the LPPA help desk being significantly impacted as a result of COVID-19. John Crowhurst may detail this further in his report. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Anne. Can I ask Mike to ask his question? Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Anne for not embarrassing me and pointing out that the question I asked under the last item, in fact, related to this item. So I just realised that. I do apologise. It was more of a comment to commend officers, and it's good to see the success of the policy, as nuclear as it sort of feels, of suspending membership when people fail to sign the agreement. Let's hope the recalcitrant one comes forward with an agreement shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I'd say as somebody who's just come from the committee, it did feel for a while like it was taking a while to implement that policy, but I think we're starting to see the fruit of it now, and I think that's very positive. Gail, can I have your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm also very pleased to see the number of number in the red category decreasing so well. I've just got one other question about the red category, though. I'm on agenda page 105, and that's the employers without a current or adequate indemnity arrangement. I don't think that group features anywhere else in the reports. If they do, I do apologise if I've missed it. But is there, given that they're in the red category, is there action being taken there?
Thank you, Gail. These employers are historic employers who joined the fund prior to the 2014 amendments, which require employers to join the LGPS with indemnity such as a bond or a guarantor. And as a result, those employers do not have any guarantor arrangements. At current, we are monitoring those positions. We are monitoring those employers, especially those that are nearing cessation. And we are working together with our actuary to ensure that when they do cease, appropriate action is taken accordingly to manage their deficit if they do have a deficit, and if they do have a surplus, to manage that as well.
Is there cessation imminent in any of these cases?
Not at the moment, no. None of are nearing cessation. However, in the next couple of years, we will begin to see those.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Gail. I have a very quick question. It might be a bit cheeky, but I did mention it to you in the pre-meeting, Anne, and that's what I'm looking at page 99, table 1, and I can see that obviously the red is coming down. That's very good to see, but I can see that the amber is slightly starting to increase. I was just wondering what we're doing to monitor that and to make sure that perhaps it doesn't sort of carry on increasing.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, you are right, such that the amber risk category is increasing. However, this can be propelled due to the number of red risk employers reducing their level of risk, going down into amber. It's not likely that our red-green employers are going into the red risk category, but that's simply what the movement is.
Thank you. That's good to confirm that, Patrick.
Yeah, I just want to come back on 2 points that have been raised. One around the admission agreements and that admission agreement policy. Adam, you're correct in that we went through a very lengthy process. I think it was over about 3 committee meetings, and also had taken on some board comments as well before we got approval of that policy, which was worked through with external lawyers and an internal lawyer as well before we got that policy approved. We are reluctant to defer members. That is the last stage, which step we would take, because the members should not be impacted, but the policy allows us to do so if we have an admitted body who are not engaging with the fund. And also it can be not only the admission body, but the outsourcing authority who are not engaging with the fund. And so we will make members aware that your new contractor who you're working for has not entered into the fund, and so we are having to defer your membership. It's something we really are reluctant to do, but unfortunately we have to protect the other employers within the fund. The other question that Gail asked was about those employer bodies that Anne referred to, are historical bodies that have been in the fund for some time. I'll give you an example of one. It would be a body like a charitable trust, like the Citizens Advice Bureau. In the past, they were allowed just to pass a resolution and so they'd pass a resolution at a local board meeting and then come to the county council and say, we're providing a service to the local community. We want our employees to have the benefits of the local government pension scheme. So they came into the fund. We didn't have any right of reply. We couldn't insist on guarantors or bonds. And so that's how they come into the fund. Obviously, as time has passed, some of those employees have now become pensioners. The charitable trusts, or whatever you call them, are now more cognizant of what pensions means and the obligations around that. And yes, there are liabilities, and they are struggling to make those contributions because of the benefits that are being paid out. So we do have conversations with those bodies. The value of those actual liabilities are small in comparison to the overall liabilities in the fund. But yes, they are struggling to make those contributions because through over the last couple of years, government funding, local authority grants have dried up, and also donations from the general public have been impacted by things such as the pandemic, and so they have struggled to pay their contributions. So we are having conversations with our actuary and about how we treat this pool of employers, and we'll come back to both committee and board with some proposals as to how we treat these this group as we go forward. That's all I'd like to say, Adam.
Thank you very much, Anne and Patrick. And I don't think there's any more sort of questions or comments. So if I read the recommendation, the pension board is invited to comment on and note the content of this report. So if people could do that in the chat, that would be very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's noted. So we'll move on to the next item. So item 6 is the Local Pensions Partnership Administration Local Government Pensions Fund Administration Report, which is difficult to say. So over to John Crowhurst, who's going to present this for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've got 3 areas to update the board on this afternoon. I don't plan to share my screen or do a page turn of the report. I know that you've seen it now for the last 4 quarters. So what I'll do is I'll give a summary of the key highlights from the performance report. I'm going to cover where we are with some of the service improvements that we've been working on over the last three months, and I'll give an update on Project PACE, and I'll cover where we are particularly with the data migration and the risks that you've highlighted in the risk register. So from the performance report, this includes Q4's performance, which covers the period from January to March 21. And some of the pages you'll note are the annual performance. We know that they're useful and you need those for your pension fund reporting accounts, so we've included those for some oversight of the full year's performance. Anne's already mentioned that from a casework perspective, the quantitative measures are good, 99% in Q4 and 99.56% across the full year. That's great, but I've said at every meeting, I think, over the last year, that we also want to focus on the qualitative measures. You know, what do members actually think of the service that we provide, and you know, how easy is it for employers to interact with us. We did have a challenge in the pensions help desk during the last quarter. We saw a 55% increase in bereavement calls coming through to us, which did have a material impact on the wait time in the help desk. We prioritised the bereavement calls over the other queues, which drove the average wait time above the aspiration of 4 minutes. What we did was we introduced a couple of redirects so that anyone contacting us about a transfer would speak to our transfers team directly, and if employers were contacting us, they would speak to our employer engagement team. Those 2 things have worked really well to control the call volumes and wait times, and we're actually going to keep them in place because we find that it seems to be a better experience for the employers in particular to speak to those individuals. So from the beginning of May, around the 10th, the help desk has been back in service. Wait times have been under 2 minutes, and the people that are contacting us via the new Contact Us form can expect a response within 48 hours. So when you see the Q1 performance report, that'll be drawn out there, and you'll be able to see that. And finally, on the performance report, the only other thing I'll highlight is the data quality, so the TPR scores. So on the common data, you'll note that there's quite a few missing deferred addresses. So we've been working with officers to come up with a proposal and plan to trace those. We've got a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss that and hopefully progress. And on the conditional data quality side, we've seen a relatively significant improvement during the period, about 2% improvement. That's predominantly as a result of the year-end process that we're just about to complete for you. We've resolved a number of missing salary queries and processed a number of historic leavers, and the GMP reconciliation project that's underway has also resolved a number of the GMP errors. So everything in that respect is moving in the right direction. So, Chair, I'm happy to pause there and take questions on the performance report before I give an update on the service improvement plan, if that's the best way to handle it.
There are no current questions at the moment, so if anyone does have a question, just put the hand up in the using the function. I have a question, but I think it's best asked at the end. So perhaps if you carry on into the second part of your presentation.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. So we've got a local service improvement plan that we've been working on, which predominantly focuses on a couple of key areas. One is the help desk, which I've already mentioned, and the second is the retirement process. It's not a contractual SLA, but it's an important one, is we want to be able to pay as many people that retire within 30 days of their retirement date. And there's a number of factors that will impact our ability to do that. What you've seen over the last year in the reports and what we've learned is that, you know, that could be attributed to the member returning their forms, when we're notified of the retirement from the employer, our own internal processes, and whether or not a member has an AVC. So what you'll see in the Q1 performance report is a more granular breakdown of the retirements. So we've got a new retirement section that's going to give a better overview of what we've learned and what activity we've undertaken. So just to give a couple of those to you today. We have introduced what we've called retirement help sessions that are bookable online. So people that are going through the retirement process can book to speak to one of our team to help them with completing the retirement forms and go through the process. On the LPPA pensions.co.uk website, we've launched a getting ready for retirement video. Any board member that has a spare 5 minutes, if you get an opportunity to review that and give us feedback, that'd be greatly appreciated, because our plan is to continue developing videos for people in the future. We've also launched a video helping people to register for the online services. And then from an employer's perspective, where we're not receiving the information in a timely fashion, our engagement team have been really proactive in providing training and support to employers to get that information to us. Obviously, longer term, when we move across to UPM and we introduce the monthly return process, that will naturally help with the information flow between the parties. So that's what we're doing locally. Once we've made some really good progress and consistently see some improvements in the number of people that have been paid within the 30 days, we are going to move on to the bereavement process. We think that's the next key one for us, given that it's a sensitive process and it's a payment process. So that's where we'll be moving on to next. So if we haven't got any questions, I will move on to Project PACE, which is the key strategic project for LPPA, and obviously has a material impact on the service delivery that we provide to the county council. So I gave an overview, I think, previously around the history as to why we've gone through this process, what the anticipated benefits would look like. So we're well into the project now. The go live date is planned for January next year for Hertfordshire. From a data transfer perspective, there are effectively 5 data cuts between the beginning of the project and go live. So what we're effectively doing is at different milestones throughout, is we're taking the data from Altair, we're loading it into UPM, and then we're making sure that everything's transferred across as expected. As mentioned already, we are working closely with officers, with Patrick and the team, and with the fund actuary to make sure that data integrity remains as we would expect. So we will be running the pensions regulator common and conditional data scores. We'll be running them in parallel in Altair and in UPM to make sure that they look as expected. And the fund actuary has also suggested that we compare. There's a universal extract that we would provide to the fund actuary to do triennial valuation and things like that. So we also have built into the project plan comparing the file that would be taken out of Altair and the file that would be taken out of UPM. And that's a full data extract. So there's lots of work going into the data migration. The first data cut is complete and has been signed off. There are no major issues to flag. There were errors naturally in the first data cut, but we've got scripts to fix. Nothing too material, and at the meeting tomorrow I'm hoping to have some more detail to talk through where we've got to so far, and then the next meeting with the actuary will go through that in even more detail to give you some more assurance. The first project status report has also been provided to officers. It's not in your pack because it was provided after the dispatch date for this meeting, but you will see them in future meetings. Included in that pack is an overview of the key risks that we've identified from the project, our impact assessment, and the current mitigation actions. And so obviously once you've had a chance to review that, we can make sure that any mitigations that can be implemented at the client fund and Civica are all in place and working as expected. In terms of the next step, so for the next period, we've just uploaded data cut 2, so we'll be working through that. We're going to begin the parallel pay run testing for the pensions payroll to make sure that works as expected. And we are going to start increasing the communication and engagement with your fund employers to start talking about how we're going to launch the monthly return functionality going into next year. We have got a pilot group of employers and payroll providers set up to help us with that, and Serco, who are your largest payroll provider, are involved in that, and that first workshop is taking place tomorrow. And finally, testing will commence on both the member and employer portals that will be made available from January next year. So lots of activity happening at the moment, but hopefully we're giving some good visibility around the progress that we're making, and obviously happy to attend future meetings and provide the assurance that you need as we work through the project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. So my question is about sort of resourcing, staffing in the round, given that, you know, there are challenges with data transfer, there's a higher number of deaths, we've got COVID, we've got, you know, this so-called pingdemic, if you like, the sort of recruitment market for example, customer services is really becoming more competitive. I'm just wondering, have you thought about sort of staffing levels and contingency as we go through all these sort of quite complex issues at the moment?
We have. So when we did a transformation a few years ago, there were some challenges post go live, and one of the reasons for that, and the lessons learned that we flagged in the report that we've provided to officers, is that we were asking people to focus on a major project and do their day job. We haven't done that this time, so the people that are working on the project are seconded to the project full time. We have brought in change experts, so if we needed specific skill sets that we didn't have in the business, so business analysts as an example, test managers, people like that have been brought in specifically to work on the project. And we did recruit a number of roles that we highlighted as resilience roles within the business that have gone through a training program and are now working within the operation. So we've done some of that work. Could there be pinch points as we move through the project? Yes, I would say, if I'm being realistic. But we are actively, as part of the project and just part of the management team in running the service, making sure that we are utilising the resources the best that we can ultimately.
Thank you, John. That's very helpful. Sarah, could you ask your question, please?
Hi, John. Yes, my question is in relation to monthly data collection that you mentioned, with the upcoming change to the new UPM system. Partly, when will this be rolled out as a bulk to sort of all employers? When can they expect to move from annual returns to monthly? And also, do you know, will this new software be able to integrate into real-time member benefit statements, you know, something similar to like what TPS members can receive, so they can get monthly, you know, updated statements?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So it's complex because obviously there's not much time between now and the end of March to receive the existing year-end files that you're used to producing and providing us, and there's a triennial valuation next year which squeezes the timescale even further. So what we've been doing is trying to work out the best way to accept the existing file format from employers for the current year-end, and then make minimal changes where we can to launch the monthly return functionality. Now, that monthly return functionality will be available from April next year. That's the plan. The intention is to go live from April. What we're trying to be realistic around is, you know, how many employers are going to be in a position to submit a file in April with all of the other stuff that we've got going on. We don't want to go in and say it's okay for employers to submit files in November, December, because we're not going to see the benefits of the new system and the functionality. So we're trying to make sure that if an employer isn't going to be ready until May, June, that you'll still be able to submit a file that will post the financial information to the system and allow us to maybe go live in June, for example. So there's options that are available to us. In terms of the real-time information, the plan is that we will post and reconcile all of the financial data that's provided on those monthly returns to each member record every month. So when a member logs into their self-service account, they'll be able to see everything that's been posted up until the end of the previous month. So it will be effectively real-time based on what we've got posted.
Okay, that's great. Just a follow-up, as an employer, who would be the team to contact to try and sort of get involved in the pilot if it's not too late, or to find out further information about sort of signing up as sort of soon as possible?
Yes, it's our employer engagement team. So you've got Hertfordshire County Council have got a dedicated employer engagement officer, and I'll pass on the details of who that is.
Oh yeah, I think it's Jonathan. Jonathan, yeah.
Jonathan, yeah, that's right. So you can make direct contact with Jonathan. It's not too late to be part of the pilot. Even though there's an initial session happening tomorrow, we do plan to record it. Obviously, we've got about 1,700 employers that are going to go through this process at some point. So we don't want 1,700 employers on the pilot, but those that are willing to help us go through this journey are welcome to join. So yeah, if you make contact with Jonathan, we can get you involved, Sarah.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
No problem.
Thank you. I think Mike has a question.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not sure, to be blunt, whether it's a question to John or to Patrick. I'm nervous because of the scale of the data transfer coming on top of or at the same time as the valuation. I suppose, Patrick and John, how confident are you that we've got sufficient plans in place and backups should it not go according to plan?
We are looking. Thanks, Mike. First of all, we're looking at what the contingencies may be if we're not in a position to upload direct into UPM. One of those contingencies could be that we accept the files through the existing employer portal, your fund, because we're not turning it off as soon as you transfer across. Because we've got a number of employers that will still be using it post go live, because they don't go live until the second phase in September next year. So we're looking at what the contingencies may be. We have tested the existing file format. We will need to change it and convert it into a different format to get it into UPM. That's inevitable. But we have already developed that script, and we are already testing that. So where we are at the moment with regards to the project, I think we're okay. I think once we finish data cut 2 and we really understand what's left to rectify in terms of that data integrity, I'll have a better view on whether or not we're going to face any challenges. But our intention, Mike, is obviously to make sure that we've got at least a plan B and probably a plan C, because we can't afford to submit the data late to the actuary to do the triennial evaluation next year. That is a key area for us to focus on.
Thank you. Patrick, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, John and I have been, as soon as I was aware that there was a system change, John and I have been talking on a frequent basis, and that is weekly calls. He's been keeping me appraised and my officers of the project pace. I've been challenging him and sometimes giving John a headache about resourcing with concerns about business as usual and the impacts on that. We still have to deliver a service to members, and I do want to focus on that service delivery, but also recognising that this is a very important project for LPPA. I also had a conversation with our actuary about this, because we're leading into evaluation, and Catherine and Barry have been in a virtual meeting with John, and I might ask Barry to comment on his views on that. And I do have a follow-up after Barry's had his said his piece on what he thinks.
Yep, thanks Patrick. Yeah, so we did have a call with John and the officers of the fund a few months ago now, when we first found out that this change was going to happen. From our purely from a kind of selfish perspective, from an actuarial point of view, one of our main concerns was, as has been pointed out, the evaluation data, which we'll be looking for kind of probably June, July time next year, and the potential impact of this transfer of data. So we, as well as considering that, we put together a kind of list of risks that we thought might be coming into play as a result of this project. discussed those with John on that call, and we followed up by kind of sending him through this list as well. So I think that has fed into the plans over the last few months. And I know that my colleagues at Hyman's in our kind of project management team are also kind of engaging with Patrick as well about making sure that the project stays on track and making sure we're picking up all the risks that are kind of out there as a result of this. And so there's quite a few kind of key milestones in terms of things that need to happen by a certain time. One of the key things from our perspective, as I mentioned, was and as John mentioned, this universal extract, which gets taken off the system. Now, as the name would suggest, it is a universal extract. So even the new software provider, that software produces the same extract, but we need to make sure that actually that it is kind of identical, essentially, in terms of the data that's pulling off from the old system and the new system. So that's one of the key things from our perspective. But I'm aware that there's various extracts testing being done, as John mentioned earlier, in the run up to the transfer. But from our perspective, we're kind of involved. Patrick's asked us to be kind of quite involved in terms of the process as time goes by, making sure things are kind of going as expected. But yeah, there's quite a few risks out there to do with this for numerous stakeholders, not just our kind of actuarial perspective, but obviously for pension fund members, making sure that the right pensions are getting paid from the new system as they were from the old system as well. So obviously that's very key, and making sure that data when people come around to retire is as it should be. So it was mentioned earlier about data cleansing prior to the transfer over. So I think this was a suggestion that we made to basically make sure that the data that's there in the first place is as good as it can be before it transfers over. And from a time perspective, if the transfer is happening quite close to when you might end up sending data to us, doing all the kind of cleansing beforehand as much as possible is advantageous in that respect as well.
Thank you, Barry and John. There's no more hands up, so if no one has any more sort of comments or questions, we'll go to the recommendation.
Sorry, Adam, Chairman. Just one question was regarding one of the risks we have on our risk register, and it's cyber risk. And we've been talking to John about penetration testing of the systems, particularly as we are going through a transition from one system to another, from one provider to another, the movement of over 100,000 data, membership data to another system. I just wanted to ask John to comment about third-party penetration testing of their systems to make sure they're secure. And is there anything that if you've done that, first of all, be the question, and then the follow-up, if you have, what was the outcome of that testing with respect to recommendations?
Thank you, Patrick. It is scheduled to be done. I'm not going to confess to be an expert in that area at all. I think what would be useful is obviously for us, as part of our usual meetings, for me to give you an update and maybe bring in Janet Morville-Smith, who's our Head of Risk and Compliance, and my colleague Martin Davison, who's the Head of IT, to give a better overview than I will be able to, and then maybe happy to take an action for the next pension board and provide a summary report that gives you that visibility.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful, John.
I think that would be very useful. Yeah. Okay, then the recommendation is that the board notes the contents of the report, and if people could just put that in the chat, that would be very useful. Thank you. Okay, I think that's noted. Thank you very much. So we move to item 7 now, which is the access update. and I think we have Patrick to talk us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. This is your quarterly report, which the same content is shared with the Pensions Committee, and it's an update on the work that's being done with the 10 other partner funds in the Access pool. It also gives you an update as to the Hertfordshire assets that have moved into the pool and the total assets under governance in the pool. So you'll see in 2.6 the assets under management and Access at 31st of March was just over 20.4 billion, sorry, just over 20 billion in 22 sub-funds. Those sub-funds are equity and bond sub-funds. In addition, there is an additional 11.1 billion, which is managed under pool governance in what we call benchmark index tracker funds, and those funds are with UBS, but it falls under the governance of the Access Joint Committee. So in total, there's about 31.5 billion in assets out of circa 55 billion pounds of Access assets in total. HCC, Hertfordshire County Council, is just over 10% of the pool assets. We have under governance 3.6 billion, which is about 62% of the assets of Hertfordshire assets pooled, and you can get there's further detail in section 8, which shows the assets that Hertfordshire has pooled, which assets are going to sit outside the pool, and assets which are to go in. A comment on one of the managers that we invested in, Longview, which is one of the managers on the Access roster. The Pensions Committee made a decision in March at their March committee meeting to disinvest from this particular manager, and this was the rationale behind that was around certain changes within the senior management of that particular investment manager, and also the change of style of management. The committee did not sign up to the particular change in style, so we as a committee supported by officers decided to make that disinvestment, and that disinvestment took place in May of this year. You'll see in section 5 some detail around the criteria as a reminder for the establishment of sub-funds and subsequent sub-funds, and the savings are captured in 5.7 billion. So you will see that the Hertfordshire Fund has made savings of 700,000, will make 700,000 per annum in savings. Section 6 shows the actual Access budget and the outturn position for 2021, where there is an underspend, and the budget that was approved by the Joint Committee for 21-22. The cost per authority of the 11 authorities, we pay each 113,000. So when you set that against the context of the savings that we're making, we're still making just over £500,000 a year in savings. So quite a significant benefit that this fund has gained from being in the Access pool. Section 7 talks about the Access Support Unit, which is the support unit hosted by the Essex County Council Fund. That fund has been, that support unit is expanding by 2 officers, and that reflects the level of work that is taking place within the Access pool, and certain pieces of work that we've got in the business plan this year include responsible investment, the establishment of illiquid funds for property infrastructure, private equity and private debt, and also there's been appointments of advisors to help fund officers and the Access Joint Committee. So, for example, we appointed a specialist company called Minerva to help us develop a responsible investment policy for the pool, and also we've made an appointment, Engine and MHP, I think they're called, who are going to help the pool with communications and assist the chairman, vice chairman and senior officers within the pool in getting the Access message out there, talking about some of the work that the Access pool has done, engaging with interested stakeholders and so forth. That's all I was going to say on the report. Adam, happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It doesn't actually look like there's any question. Oh, we have got a question. Gail, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just going back to Longview. In table 2, where it shows a cost of 756,000 associated, and I assume that that was the cost historically associated with Longview. Is there likely to be any mitigation given whatever that money has been reinvested in? Is that likely to reverse that position?
Yeah, I would expect to see the savings increase when I provide the next report, because Longview, we transitioned from a manager, Allianz, where the management fees were a lot lower than Longview. And so by disinvestment, the impact on those fee savings will reduce. However, that said, we've also put in place an equity protection policy, which acts like an insurance to prevent losses of between 10 and 30% when equity markets fall, and that obviously comes at a cost. And we've worked with a specialist manager, so the investment management fees in certain respects have gone down with what we've done through the pool and by disinvesting from Longview. But we're also paying additional investment management costs because we've contracted with a specialist manager to put in place this insurance. It's like a premium we're paying, and we have to post collateral and so forth. So
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. So the recommendation is that the pension board note the contents of the report. If you could do that now, please. Thank you. So that's noted. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 8, which is the date of future meetings, and I was just they are as they're written there. I was just going to ask perhaps Teresa to confirm that we are having these meetings remotely going into the future.
To date, that's how it stands.
Okay, thank you very much. So as things stand, we're going to be having future meetings online until there's any changes noted. So I'm not going to have a vote on this, but they are as they're printed there. So item 9 is any other business. I haven't got any other business, and then we're going to, I think, the next thing for us to do would be to go into part 2 business. So I think we need to stop the camera, so to speak.
Live stream ceased, I'll put a message in the chat so you know when you're in part 2.
Thank you very much. And I think also this might be a nice time just to have perhaps a 10-minute break, and perhaps we'll come back at 10 to 4. Might be a nice time.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so I'll just keep noting have a look at the notes just to see when the camera finishes.